these people are on the same committee just now, so they take that.
subcommittee will come to order. Please close the doors if you can. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This subcommittee is convening this hearing regarding inhumane treatment of children and families at the border. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. I want to welcome. Oh, okay. Well, we're going to start with a video. If you would run that. How are we doing on the opening video? Okay, let me know when that comes up. I want to welcome the members of the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. I want to welcome our distinguished witnesses and guests to this hearing on the humanitarian crisis at the border. The American people are up in arms about reports both from the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security and the media and various human rights groups about the dangerous overcrowding, spreading infections, influenza, diarrhea, and lice, pervasive medical inattention, sexual assault, and systematic abuse of the rights of migrants in U.S. government care and custody at the border. We hope to shine a bright light this afternoon on these dark developments to enable rapid and effective legislative responses. I especially want to thank our first witness, Yasmin Juarez, for coming to share the painful story of her 19-month-old daughter, Marie, who experienced untreated respiratory complications during her detention by ICE and died shortly thereafter. We know that 6 children have lost their lives while in detention at the border. I want to thank all members of Congress and this committee who have traveled to the border to investigate, and all of those who are prepared to do so in the coming weeks. The human rights violations and family catastrophes happening at the border are not improving a serious regional refugee crisis, but they are worsening and exacerbating it. What is driving this refugee crisis? Gang violence and intimidation, government dysfunction, and police corruption, political persecution, rape, and gender violence, they are all driving unprecedented numbers of desperate families and terrified children out of the northern triangle of Central America to the United States. Many of the migrants amassing at our border are escaping threats of imminent death or bodily harm, or the prospect of their children being forced into violent gangs or criminal networks of sexual abuse and trafficking. Some are climate change refugees fleeing the devastating effects of extreme drought and flooding in their home areas. The journey to the border today for these huddled masses is traumatic and filled with deadly peril. Along the way, many are robbed, assaulted, or raped. Some have been killed. Parents have drowned alongside their children in the Rio Grande. But hundreds of thousands have made it to our border. They turn themselves into border officials and make their legal claim for asylum, a claim that they have the right to make under both American and international law. Yet they've been greeted not as refugees whose asylum claims must be heard and taken seriously under our due process of law, but as presumptive criminals and threats to the American people. The Trump administration has prosecuted them, subjected their families to prolonged and miserable detention, separated children from their parents, and forced migrants back into Mexico. The entire thrust of this policy is punishment, both court-ordered and government-administered, and deterrence by means of mass trauma. While the Trump administration did not cause the refugee crisis in Central America, it has exacerbated it by cutting off hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid for education, healthcare, and community development to precisely the countries which the refugees are now desperately fleeing in huge numbers, we owe the region at least this aid, given that we are a key market for the drug trade that has wreaked so much violence and insecurity in these countries. And all of us are implicated in foreign policies toward Central America over the last several decades, which have emphasized war and military assistance over economic and social development. The administration's chaotic policy responses have produced a severe humanitarian crisis at the border, with dangerous overcrowding, widespread sickness and disease, and a shocking failure to provide adequate medical care, food, water, and sanitation. America is watching scenes of sick children packed into holding cells, pregnant women sleeping on cold floors, and mothers trying to warm newborn babies with aluminum blankets. The policy of separating thousands of migrant children from their parents is designed to make conditions at the border so miserable that the refugees will simply stop coming. Last May, then Attorney General Sessions stated, if you don't want your child to be separated, then don't bring them across the border illegally. But these policies are failing to deter asylum-seeking families because the underlying causes of their migration are so grave and overwhelming. In fact, the Trump deterrence policy seems to be having no deterrent effect at all. According to Customs and Border Protection's own data, family migration spiked in the month after the administration announced the family separation policy, and there have been sharp increases ever since, unlike anything we've seen before in our lifetimes. Whatever else these harsh policies are intended to accomplish, the message received by hundreds of thousands of people seems to be, migrate now before things get even worse. The administration has failed to respond in a way that meets the actual humanitarian challenges at the border. Our government should be sending doctors and social workers and humanitarian supplies to the border, along with asylum officers and legal resources to help identify and process claims. We should be making sure that all of the money being spent at the border is not being wasted, but used to meet the urgent nutritional and medical needs of the migrants. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General warned of a ticking time bomb at Border Patrol detention facilities. The IG cited children crammed into cages with no access to showers or hot meals, and serious overcrowding and prolonged detention for adults, some in standing room only conditions with no room to lie or even sit down. At the Border Patrol station in Clint, Texas, the New York Times reported outbreaks of scabies, shingles, and chicken pox were spreading among the hundreds of children in cramped cells, agents said. The stench of the children's dirty clothing was so strong it spread to the agents' own clothing. People in town would scrunch their noses when they left work. The children cried constantly. One girl seemed likely enough to try to kill herself that the agents made her sleep on a cot in front of them so they could watch her as they were processing new arrivals. There is no excuse for our government being so unprepared and indifferent to refugee flows that have been steadily mounting for months. These conditions violate American law and international human rights standards. We would not accept these conditions for refugees anywhere else in the world. The Trump administration reversed a policy, for example, that largely protected pregnant women from detention. Over 200 human rights and civil rights groups have called for the policy's reinstatement, noting the current arbitrary detention of pregnant women violates international human rights norms. Last week, the DHS Inspector General reported that 31% of children across 5 facilities had been held longer than 72 hours in violation of Flores, the 1997 settlement agreement that required children to be placed in safe and sanitary conditions and directs children to be transferred out of detention facilities as expeditiously as possible. There have now been news reports of migrant children detained for much longer than 72 hours and many for weeks. There is a dangerous lack of accountability at detention facilities. We know that many officers are doing their best under these trying and excruciating conditions, but after recent reports, there is little doubt that there is a real contingent of border agents acting in callous and scandalous ways, punishing scared and helpless children, mocking migrant deaths on Facebook, and even attacking in vile ways members of Congress who dare to demand fair treatment for migrants under the rule of law. I'm pleased that the acting secretary has pledged to investigate these reports, but reportedly top Border Patrol officials have been aware of the book group and its egregious contents for many months and even years. What sort of culture exists within DHS that would foster or even tolerate this behavior for so long? Why did the administration and its allies block efforts to ensure that increased funding for the border be accompanied by provisions to ensure responsible oversight over how our money as taxpayers is being spent? How can we end official tolerance for these shameful actions in our name? I hope our hearing today will bring these difficult facts into the light and pose hard questions about official actions that shame us as a society, not as Democrats or Republicans or independents, but as Americans. I also hope that this hearing, in conjunction with Chairman Cummings' full committee hearing scheduled for Friday, will identify immediate steps to provide relief and change in these conditions. I'll now go to the opening video before I turn it over to our ranking member, Mr. Roy.
Report reveals just how grim conditions are inside border detention facilities in South Texas. New photos show severe overcrowding.
The incoming president of the American Academy of Pediatrics toured 2 CBP facilities last week and tells CBS News they are no place for children.
When they opened the door, the first thing that hit us was a smell, and it was a smell of sweat, urine, and feces.
Investigators also say they observed overcrowding at facilities where children are being held, and that many are being held longer than legally allowed. At 3 facilities they visited, investigators say children had no access to showers, and at 2 facilities, no access to hot meals.
The children are hardly being fed anything nutritious, and they are being medically neglected. We're seeing a flu outbreak, and we're also seeing a lice infestation. We have children sleeping on the floor. It's the worst conditions I've ever witnessed in several years of doing these inspections.
Sobre cómo estuvo el centro de detención.
No le daban poca comida, unos niños que no se bañaban, no los bañaban, los trataban mal, allí donde estábamos. No, unos niños enfermos, que ayer les decía que lo llevaran al hospital, pero no lo llevaban.
Well, CBS News has confirmed that a 6th migrant child has died after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. Previously, officials had confirmed the deaths of 5 migrant children since December. But an official at the Department of Health and Human Services told CBS News late Wednesday that an unaccompanied 10-year-old girl from El Salvador died in U.S. custody in September.
So visually, I had people there that told me the job that they are doing is incredible.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Roy of Texas, for 5 minutes for his opening statement, and I will be liberal with that.
I thank the chairman. Ms. Juarez, on behalf of this committee, all the members here, the entire House of Representatives, there are no words that we can possibly share with you about the loss of your little girl. I'm the father of a son and a daughter. I cannot possibly imagine what you have gone through, and we owe it to you and to our country and to all those who seek to come here to have a system that works and to not have something like this happen. And so my prayers from my family to you, and we thank you for being here. Mr. Chairman, I have to say, I am frustrated, though, with the title of the hearing. It's setting a tone that doesn't allow us to come together to address this difficult problem in a way that is befitting of the United States and our welcoming nature as a country. It is a hearing entitled Kids in Cages. What we say and the hyperbole we use matters. As a member from Texas and a former staffer on the Senate Judiciary Committee, as a member of Congress, I've been to the border many times, and to this day I have never seen a kid in a cage the way those words seem to indicate it. Let's look at the advertisements for this hearing, okay? The slide on the right is the ad for this hearing, showing pictures of kids supposedly in cages. The picture on the left is the picture from 2014, when President Obama's DHS Secretary Jay Johnson was giving a tour of a facility where you've got, yes, chain link barriers put up in temporary facilities at that time under the Obama administration in a way to deal with a crisis at 2014 time of unaccompanied children riding on the top of train cars. We remember those horrific stories from 5 years ago, and trying to deal with the problem of massive numbers of people coming across the border, oftentimes with parents that aren't the parents claiming to be the parents of the child, which is horrific. Oftentimes in facilities and dealing with situations where you want to separate the children from bad actors. We have, in the most recent time, we've had 144,000 people that CPP had to deal with in May. How do you deal with that? Under the most generous circumstances of trying to figure out what to do to care for these children, release them to family members, release them in a safe way, care for them, give them food, give them health care. How would we have them do it when we're denying them the facilities and the resources to do it? We should discuss the humanitarian crisis. We're experiencing an unprecedented surge in migrants. You see the chart over here. I don't have to go through it. The red line, you see the massive spike in apprehensions. The numbers in June were 94,987, the highest June number recorded in at least the last 5 years. It was down from 144,000 in May. That often happens because of the heat in June. I've personally seen that an overwhelming number of individuals fill our Border Patrol stations and stretch our Border Patrol workers to go above and beyond. We all agree that they're stretched. There is no disagreement in this room on that, at least today. There might have been 5 months ago. I've seen the facilities and I've not seen a single cage in the way that it is being depicted. I'm seeing ways to try to separate people and keep them safe. And we demean the process and our Border Patrol agents, who are law enforcement officers for the government of the United States, trying to do their job, when we call them cages. It is not helpful to use this crisis that so many denied and called manufactured now to score political points. In this fiscal year, more than 694,000 aliens have been apprehended, whether they were claiming asylum or whether they were just straight coming illegally. On February 15th, the President declared a national emergency at the border to deal with the escalating crisis. On May 1st, the Office of Management and Budget wrote Congress its first request for emergency funding to address this worsening crisis. That request and the follow-up was ignored. And the situation grew so dire, I found myself in agreement with the editorial board of the New York Times, who said, it is time for Congress to stop dithering and pass emergency funding to deal with this nightmare. I even forced a few votes on the floor of the House of Representatives. How dare I force votes in the People's House? And some of my colleagues joined. Why? Because for 5 months, we had listened to some of our colleagues say there is no crisis. Speaker Pelosi called the situation a fake crisis at the border. Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Engel called the situation a fake crisis at the border. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler, there is no crisis at the border. Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, one of my colleagues on this committee, we don't have a border crisis. Representative Doggett, a fellow Texan, called the situation a phony border crisis. Representative Sanford Bishop called it a crisis that does not exist. I could go on and on. There are dozens of examples, hundreds of examples. Instead of focusing on the magnets that will allow cartels to exploit women and children, some in this body would rather attack the men and women on the front lines of the crisis. In the face of our willful blindness and at times blatant falsehood, CBP has performed over 3,000 rescues this year. 3,000 rescues this year, including last month in Laredo, where they rescued 14 migrants locked in a horse trailer that was 124 degrees inside with no ventilation or exit. Now, we can have a robust debate about how we solve this crisis, about what we do about legal and illegal, about what we do about asylum, about ports of entry, between ports of entry. These are all complex questions, and I wish we would all sit in a room, roll our sleeves up, and sit down and figure out how to solve the problem. But the reality is CBP is out there saving lives. Agencies such as the CBP do not have enough resources to respond to the crisis while also performing their law enforcement duties. DHS Secretary McClellan said this weekend, quote, we have no evidence that children went hungry. Now, we're oversight. We should go dig into that statement. I agree with that. Let's go make sure that there aren't children going hungry. Of course we're worried about it. This is now his words. Of course we're worried about it. Everyone in the entire chain of command was worried about the situation for children. That's why we've built soft-sided facilities, 1,000 spaces. We're building more that we're going to be opening next week. We're trying to provide as much space and as much nice a setting as we possibly can while children are in our custody. But the big point was to move them to HHS. Let me give you an update. On June 1st, we had 2,500 children in our custody. 1,200 had been with us over 3 days. Now that we have the supplemental from Congress, the supplemental that was being denied, We have the supplemental from Congress. HHS has additional beds, and we only have 350 as of yesterday afternoon's report, and only 20 of those children have been with us for more than 3 days. So that's a huge improvement, and that's his words. Today, I talked to a CBP official that said at no point in time has the CBP facility been lacking in supplies for migrant children. Okay, that's his word. We should look into that and make sure that's the case. When my friends across the aisle ignored the administration's request for emergency funding for 2 months, DHS took action and CBP began paying for supplies out of their operational budget. Sometimes they paid out of their own pockets to make sure that things were taken care of. Importantly, my chief of staff went to Clint this weekend because I felt so strongly about looking into what some of my colleagues were claiming. I couldn't go because of a family conflict, but my chief of staff went. And he looked and he talked and he saw and he took pictures. He observed some of the pictures you're going to see here, which is from a video from a Border Patrol head in, I believe, in Arizona. Facilities where you're seeing lots of materials and supplies and food. And there's other pictures that show other materials and supplies and food. Now, can I guarantee that all of that got to every person who's been detained? No. But this is what we're getting in terms of information and what we're seeing, what I see with my own eyes. I've seen with my own eyes the facilities in McAllen where I talk to Border Patrol and they'll see some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle come in and go, well, this all looks great. They walk across the street and they go get in front of a camera and they say kids in cages. That's not going to solve the problem. That's not going to help Ms. Juarez. That's not going to help stop the cartels who made $2 billion in 2018 profiting by moving people through Mexico to come here. Hundreds of millions of dollars, the Reynosa faction of the Gulf Cartel, the Cartel del Noreste of Los Zetas, the Sinaloas, dangerous cartels making tons of money moving people through. And even if you believe this is because the Northern Triangle is suffering in calamitous situations economically in terms of safety and security and gangs, agreed. But what we're talking about is a profit model that cartels are abusing to use for profit to come then and use our asylum laws to harm these people and to harm that father and that child that died in the river trying to come here. Now, I've gone longer than I probably should have, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that you've given me the time. We have a broken immigration system, must act quickly. I believe we need to fix the asylum problem, the Flores settlement agreement. We need to have a strong collective agreement on what we can do to secure the border. I've recently introduced a bill aimed at addressing the crisis, the Charitable Donations Freedom Act, to make sure there's no barriers in the Anti-Deficiencies Act. If anybody wants to give something, they can give charitable gifts. I don't even know if it's necessary, but let's make sure there's no barriers and let's work together to bring down any barriers to make sure people are cared for. I don't believe that the CBP isn't doing everything it can to ensure that human beings are treated the way they should. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses, and I appreciate the chairman's time.
Mr. Roy, thank you very much. Now, we have 2 panels today. The first panel has just one witness, and that's Yasmin Juarez, who's come, and so I am going to swear her in. We are very grateful to you for your appearance today. We extend you our condolences, our sympathy, and also our gratitude because you're doing a great service to America by coming forward to tell your story. You are accompanied today by Jasmine Rumbeau, a certified interpreter with the New York State Unified Court System. You have a headset where you can do simultaneous translation for Ms. Juarez when the members speak or ask questions. I believe we're expecting votes to be called in about half an hour, I think the last I heard. So we will let the witness testify. We will have whatever questions there are, and when we return, we'll open up with the second panel. So I'd like to swear you in, so please stand if you would, Ms. Juarez, and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you, Ms. Juarez. Please be seated. Please be sure to speak directly into the microphone. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. I also, without objection, will waive onto the committee for the purposes of participation today Ms. Tlaib from Michigan and Mr. Grothman from Wisconsin. Hearing no objection, they are waived on. And with that, Ms. Juarez, you are now recognized to speak to the committee.
Primeramente les agradezco a todos ustedes, a cada uno por nombre. Que el Señor Jesús me los bendiga. Gracias, presidente Raskin y el miembro de rango Roy, miembros del comité, por invitarme a estar acá. Me llamo Yasmín Juárez. Mi hija Marie y yo huimos de Guatemala buscando asilo en los Estados Unidos. Hicimos este viaje porque temíamos por nuestras vidas. El viaje fue peligroso, pero tenía más miedo a lo que nos podría pasar si nos quedábamos en mi país. Entonces vinimos a Estados Unidos, donde yo esperaba construir una vida mejor y más segura para mi hija Marie. Lastimosamente, vi morir a mi niña, lenta y muy dolorosamente, unos meses antes de su segundo cumpleaños. Ella dejó de existir.
First of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you, and may Jesus bless each and every one of you. Thank you, Chairman Raskin, Ranking Member Roy, and members of the committee for inviting me. My name is Yasmín Juárez. My daughter, Marie, and I fled Guatemala seeking asylum in the United States. We made this journey because we feared for our lives. The trip was dangerous, but I was more afraid of what might happen to us if we stayed. So we came to the United States, where I hope to build a better, safer life for us. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Instead, I watched my baby girl die slowly and painfully just a few months before her second birthday.
Me duele revivir esta experiencia y recordar lo que yo sufrí. Pero estoy aquí porque el mundo debe saber lo que está sucediendo con tantos niños en las cárceles dentro de la detención de ICE. Mi hermosa niña se ha ido ahora, pero espero que su historia estimule al gobierno de los Estados Unidos a actuar para que niños no mueran por negligencia y maltrato que dan.
It is painful for me to relive this experience and remember that suffering. But I am here because the world should know what is happening to so many children inside of ICE detention. My beautiful girl is gone, but I hope her story will spur this country's government to act so that more children do not die because of neglect and mistreatment.
Marie siempre había sido una niña súper feliz y muy saludable. El viaje desde Guatemala lo hizo sin ningún problema. Nos retuvieron bajo la custodia de CBP durante 3 o 4 días en un lugar conocido como La Hielera, porque ahí hace mucho frío. Nos encerraron en una jaula con más de 30 personas, mamás y niños, y nos obligaron a dormir en un piso de concreto.
Marie had always been a super happy, very healthy baby. She made the journey from Guatemala without any problems. We were held in CBP custody for 3 or 4 days in a facility known as La Hielera, or the ice box, because it's freezing cold. We were locked in a cage with about 30 other people, moms and children, and forced to sleep on a concrete floor.
Nos enviaron al centro de detención ICE en Daly, Texas. Una enfermera examinó a Marie cuando llegamos y la encontró sana. Nos metieron en una habitación con otras 5 personas, madres e hijos. En total éramos como 12. Noté, obviamente, cuando yo entré al centro de detención a muchos niños enfermos. Y que no hacían ningún esfuerzo en poder atenderlos, en poder separar a los niños de los sanos y de los enfermos. En nuestra habitación noté inmediatamente que había un niño enfermo y eso como madre a mí me dolió. Su madre trató de llevarlo a la clínica, pero no los atendieron.
We were sent to the ICE detention center in Dilley, Texas. A nurse examined Marie when we arrived and found her healthy. We were packed into a room with 5 other people, mothers with children, a total of 12 people in our room. I noticed immediately how many sick children there were in detention, that no effort was being made to separate the sick from the healthy or to care for them. One of the little boys in our room was sick. As a mother, this was very hurtful to see. His mom tried to take him to the clinic, but they kept sending him back without being seen, without care.
Al cabo de una semana, en J-Live, Mario se enfermó, mi niña. Primero era toser y estornudar, mucha secreción en su nariz. La llevé a la clínica, donde esperé con muchas personas, muchísimas personas, en un gimnasio, donde nos mantenían horas y horas esperando para poder ser atendidas. Un asistente médico examinó a Marie días después y me dijo que tenía una infección respiratoria, en el cual le recetó Tylenol, que es miel para la tos.
Within a week of being at Dili, Marie got sick, my little girl. First, it was coughing and sneezing and a lot of nasal secretions. I brought her to the clinic, where I waited in line with many other people in a gymnasium to get medical care. When the physician's assistant saw her days after, she said that Marie had a respiratory infection and prescribed Tylenol and honey for her cough.
Pero al día siguiente, María empeoró. Tenía fiebre a más de 104 grados y comenzó a tener diarrea, vómitos, no comía. Y recuerdo que su cabeza, su cuerpecito estaba sumamente caliente, estaba débil. Al otro día me dijo que tenía una infección en el oído y le dio antibióticos. Le supliqué que le realizaran un examen más profundo, pero nos enviaron de regreso a nuestra habitación.
The next day, however, Marie was worse. She was running a fever of over 140 degrees and began having diarrhea and vomiting as well. She wouldn't eat, and I remember her head and her little body felt so hot and that she was weak. On this day, they told me that she had an ear infection and gave her antibiotics. I begged them to do deeper exams, but they sent us back to our room.
Intenté volver varias veces a la clínica. Esperaba en la fila desde temprano, junto a docenas de madres y niños enfermos. 2 veces me rechazaron y me dijeron que me devolviera a mi cuarto.
I tried to come back multiple times to the clinic. I'd wait in lines from early in the morning with dozens of other mothers with their sick children. Twice I was told away and told to go back to my room.
María había perdido casi el 8% de su peso corporal en solo 10 días. Todavía vomitaba constantemente. Finalmente la vio un médico y este médico me dijo que le diera Pedialyte y Vicks Vaporub, en el cual luego después de su muerte yo hacía investigaciones en internet que el Vicks Vaporub no debe darse a un niño menor de 12 años porque causa daños respiratorios.
Marie lost almost 8% of her body weight in just 10 days. She was still vomiting constantly. When she was finally seen by a doctor, they told me to give her Pedialyte and Vicks VapoRub. I didn't learn until after she died, when I was researching it online, that you aren't supposed to give Vicks to kids under 2 years old because it could cause respiratory problems.
Mi bebé Se enfermó más y más días, todos los días. Vomitaba constantemente, tenía mucha fiebre y no comía ni dormía. Su cuerpo estaba sumamente desgastado, débil. Finalmente recibí una noticia dentro de las instalaciones de J-Live en la cual a mí me dijeron que ya podía irme con mis familiares, en la cual yo me sentía alivianada porque mis pensamientos eran llevar a Marie a un pediatra para que la pudieran revisar y qué tan grave estaba, porque a mí como mamá me importaba muchísimo y la veía sufrir como no tienen idea, y eso como madre a mí me dolía muchísimo.
My baby got sicker. She was vomiting constantly. Her fever kept going up. She wouldn't eat or sleep. Her body was weak. And when I finally received a notice that Maria had an appointment to be seen by a doctor, I was so relieved. Though that didn't happen, we were told that we were going to be processed for a transfer out of detention. And at that point, I was relieved because I thought that I would actually be able to take her to see a doctor. As a mother, it was very important for me to do that. It was very difficult for me to see her suffering.
A las 5 de la mañana del día 25 de marzo, nos despertaron para ser procesados, para transferirnos fuera de las instalaciones del centro de detención. Nos dejaron por allí por horas y no pude ir a la clínica. Cuando dejamos J-Live, María fue vista por un médico personal. Más tarde descubrí que sus registros médicos decían que no tenía restricciones médicas y que estaba autorizada para poder hacer el viaje, cuando no fue así. Ella jamás, antes de salir de J-Live, jamás fue revisada por un médico, cuando en la historial médico decía eso, pero yo como madre nunca pasó que ella vio al médico.
What happened was that at 5 a.m. we were awoken and taken to be processed for transfer out of detention, and there we waited for hours. She was not taken to the clinic to be seen by medical staff. I later found out that her medical records said that she had been cleared as someone with no medical restriction.